I was never meant to survive my birth. In my city of endless night, all third-born sons are sacrificed to Lolth, a brutal decree of the Spider Queen that snuffs out any life she deems excess. I was the third son. On the night I entered this world, beneath a cavern ceiling tangled in ghostly webs, my fate was to be an offering. I remember, though, perhaps it is only a nightmare, that silken altar cloth brushing my newborn skin and the cold chant of priestesses sharpening into a scream. By some cruel twist of fortune, I lived. In a rare moment of chaos or mercy, the ritual was never completed, and I was spared. But the Spider Queen's web was already cast around me, and I have lived every day since in its strands, ensnared before I even drew breath. From my first whimpering cries, I learned that my life was not my own. My earliest memory is not a mother's gentle lullaby, but her whispered devotion to Lolth beside my crib, a promise that my fragile life would forever serve the Spider Queen's well. I was cradled in darkness, rocked to sleep by the distant echoes of screams from the temples, where weak Drow and captured slaves were slaughtered in droves to appease Lolth's hunger. The air in our house always hung thick with the coppery scent of blood and the pungent incense of sacrifice. I would come to know those scents as intimately as a surfacer child knows the smell of home and hearth. In place of warm affection, fear and obedience were the pillars of my upbringing. Before I could even speak, the law of our matriarchal world was etched into my soul. Females rule and males obey or die. I grew up in the shadow of my mother, the matron mother of our house, a majestic and terrifying figure whose every smile hid fangs. To her, I was expendable from the start. Males are tools, assets to be used and discarded, and she made sure I knew this with each passing year of my childhood. "You are alive by Lolth's grace alone," she would hiss to me, her long nails lifting my chin. "Displease me, and that grace will be withdrawn." I did not doubt her. I had seen what displeasing a priestess could mean. A flick of her wrist and a sacrificial blade finding home in a servant's heart. In our house, love and pity are things best left for humans. To show gentleness was to show weakness, and weakness earns only scorn. My lessons began early, harsh and unyielding. I was taught to recite prayers to Lolth before I could count, each intonation drilled into me with the crack of a snake-headed whip when my voice faltered. I learned to keep my eyes downcast in the presence of my sisters and aunts. Any hint of defiance punished swiftly. One morning, when I was no more than a boy of 20, still a babe by elven years, I made the mistake of meeting my eldest sister's gaze at the breakfast table. In a heartbeat, she had me by the throat against the wall, her cleric's whip coiling around my arm. The snake's fangs bit deep, and venom coursed fire through my veins as she snarled a litany of my inferiority. "Know your place, brother," she said as she released me to collapse on the floor. The scars from that whipping still cross my forearm, pale lines against obsidian skin, a reminder etched in flesh. In the bleak academy halls where male Drow are raised, I was schooled alongside my brothers and other second-class sons in the arts of combat and survival. We were not taught honor or camaraderie. We were taught cunning, ruthlessness, and absolute loyalty to Lolth. The instructors mostly hardened male weapons. Masters granted a sliver of authority by the matrons, drove us to compete viciously. Being first in the ladder was always favorable. The elder boy outranked the second boy, and so on, and it was not uncommon for siblings to assassinate each other to climb higher. More than once, I woke to find a boy's bunk empty and smeared with blood, the result of an overnight lesson in ambition. Each time, the masters would simply drag the stained mattress away and tell us that the Spider Queen had no use for the weak. I learned that lesson well. If I wanted to see another dawn in the Underdark, I had to prove myself useful and obedient. Yet even as a child, a quiet voice in the back of my mind asked questions it shouldn't. I remember the first time I saw a cave spider devour one of its own, a smaller male spider consumed by the engorged matriarch of the nest. I watched its legs twitch and go still, and I trembled, realizing that this was the way of my people in miniature. Is this all we are? That small voice wondered. Endless devouring darkness? I quickly buried the thought. Such doubts were dangerous. In the nursery and school, we were surrounded by spies and informants, each eager to curry favor with the priestesses by denouncing any softness in their peers. I knew even as a boy that a wrong word or a forbidden tear could mark me for death. So I hid every compassion, every fragile hope under a mask of sullen obedience. They trained me to scorn kindness and trust no one, and I wore that training like armor. Daily life as a male Drow is a study in controlled terror. Each day begins in servitude and ends in uncertainty. I wake in the barracks before our house's great spider idol, joining my fellow males in a morning supplication. We kneel, dozens of us soldiers, servants, lesser mages, all bowing our heads to the carven likeness of Lolth. The silence is absolute. We scarcely dare to breathe. Obedience to that demonic entity is absolute, and shrines to other gods do not survive for long. A single stray thought during prayer, a single missed word in the incantation, could be seen as heresy. And heresy carries only one punishment in our city: to be sacrificed to Lolth. I press my forehead to the cold stone floor and chant the responses, heart pounding, determined that today will not be my last. After the prayers, the machinery of our matriarchal household roars to life. We male fighters march to drills under the watchful eye of the weapons master of the house, a position I one day attained, a rare scrap of status for a male. As weapons master, I train other young males in swordplay and strategy, yet even this title grants me little solace. I remain ever beneath any female's boot. During weapons practice, if a female priestess chooses to observe, often under the pretense of inspecting our readiness, we all know it is truly an inspection of our loyalty and fear. I have seen a drill session turn to carnage on a whim. A priestess displeased with a recruit's form might order me to flog him on the spot. Or worse, she might unleash a summoned Yoklo, handmaiden demon of Lolth, into our midst to test us. We would fight for our lives in a frenzy, slaying the demon or dying in the attempt as our mistress looked on with a cruel smile. Those who fought well might earn a nod of approval. Those who faltered became the demon's playthings, and later, its nourishment. Thus, even our training was often a dance on the knife's edge between life and death, all to amuse the powerful. My duties vary by the day, all of them dictated by the women who rule us. Some days, I am summoned to attend my mother or one of my sisters as they go about Lolth's rituals in the grand chapel of our house. There, I must stand perfectly still in the shadows, a silent attendant holding incense or bearing a tray of sacrificial daggers trying to be invisible. Captives and slaves are dragged in chains before the altar, while the priestesses chant praises to the Spider Queen. The fortunate victims are killed swiftly, throats opened in one precise slash. The less fortunate are subjected to torturous offerings, flayed, poisoned with venom to prolong their agony, their screams echoing off the cavern walls. The priestesses of Lolth demand sacrifices at an astounding rate, hundreds each week, across the city, so the flow of blood is near constant. I have stood amid pools of sticky blood on the temple floor, the warmth seeping through my boots, while my sister exulted in a successful ritual. And I have quivered in dread when, on rare occasions, the sacrifice did not please our goddess. We all know the signs, the sudden hush of magic in the air, the priestess's chant faltering as an unseen, divine fury gathers. In one such terrifying moment, I saw giant spiders pour from the shadows at Lolth's wordless command and devour the failing priestess alive in front of the entire congregation. The image of my sister's mentor writhing as arachnid limbs cocooned her in webbing and fangs is forever burned into my memory. On that day, I learned that even the mighty priestesses live one misstep away from doom, and by extension, we males always blamed for any failure are never more than moments from execution. When I am not at drills or attending rituals, I often serve as a hunter for my house. Among male Drow, one of the most prestigious roles available is that of a hunter, tasked with venturing out to capture victims for sacrifice. It is dark irony that the closest thing to freedom I ever taste is in these missions beyond our city gates. The only times I am allowed outside the direct oversight of a female, though even then, a priestess typically leads the raid. We emerge into the endless night of the Underdark tunnels, a squad of dark elves with packs of giant spiders at our command, ranging far for fresh prey. In these moments, skittering through echoing caverns and mushroom forests lit by faint bioluminescence, I almost feel like a true predator rather than chattel. Almost. But then we find our quarry a band of human adventurers lost in the dark, or encampment of deep gnomes, or a lone Dorgar scout and the ambush is sprung. The thrill of the hunt gives way to the grim reality of its purpose. We ensnare them in globules of spider silk, subdue them with poisoned darts, and drag them screaming back toward our city. More fodder for the altars. I have delivered countless such captives to the temple gates, hearing their pleas, "Mercy, please, why are you doing this?" Only to steel myself and feel numb resignation as they are hauled to their gruesome fates. In those moments, I tell myself I am merely the instrument of a greater will. If it hadn't been me, another male would have done it, and if I refused, I would lie on the slab next to them as the next sacrifice. Such rationalizations are all that allow me to sleep at midday, for in the Underdark, our days are just cycles marked by the tolling of the great gong in Lolth's temple. Even so, each face of each victim lingers in my dreams, their final cries tangled up with the droning prayers of the priestesses. Punishments in our society are swift and often disproportionate. The priestesses are judge, jury, and executioner by Lolth's decree, and a male's word means nothing against theirs. I have seen a stable boy put to death for a single clumsy mistake. He dropped one of the matron's pet spiders and stepped on it by accident. For that crime, he was flayed alive and hung in the gateway as a warning, his agony celebrated as another offering to the Spider Queen, for harming a spider is punishable by death in Lolth's eyes. Treachery and violence are not just common, they are the currency of survival. We all know the story of the weapons master from a lesser house who grew too skilled, too proud. The matrons of his house and ours conspired to eliminate him lest he become a rallying figure for male ambition. One night he simply disappeared. Later we heard he had been transformed into a drider, that half-spider, half-drow abomination, as punishment for his impudent pride. Whether true or not, the message was clear. A male who rises too high will be knocked back down, one way or another. Consorts, wizards, weapon masters, it matters not. We are allowed to live and excel only at the sufferance of our female superiors. And so passes each day in the eternal midnight of Drow society. I exist under a constant weight of vigilance. I bow and scrape before every high-born lady I pass, eyes on the ground, hands clasped to show I do not even subconsciously reach for a weapon. I perform every task given, no matter how degrading, with outward enthusiasm. If ordered to massage the tired feet of a priestess after her long day of torture and intrigue, I do so without hesitation, suppressing any flicker of resentment. If commanded to execute a disobedient slave, I obey, swinging the blade with dutiful force while choking back the bile rising in my throat. This is the price of drawing breath as a male in the Spider Queen's city. Absolute submission. My male peers and I reinforce each other in this theater of subservience, for if one of us shows hesitation, all of us might suffer. At night, when I return to my barracks cot, bone-weary and soul-numb, I often collapse instantly into a shallow, haunted sleep. But some nights, like tonight, sleep eludes me. Instead, I lie awake on the thin mattress, staring at the stalactite-pocked ceiling, and I listen to the skitter of spiders in the dark. I wonder which of us males will vanish next, claimed as another sacrifice, or crawling into the priestess's sanctum never to return. It might be me. In Drow society, tomorrow is not promised, especially not to one born male. In the pitch black of my life, desire is a dangerous spark. Still, it lives in me, guttering and small, but alive. By all dictates of our creed, I should not want anything beyond what Lolth permits. To even imagine a different life is heresy punishable by death. And yet, in the silent hours of the barracks, when I'm sure all others are asleep or lost in prayer, I let myself indulge in forbidden thoughts. What do I desire, above all? Freedom. I desire the simple freedom to wake without terror, to sleep without guilt, to live without this yoke of ceaseless fear. It is a want so vast I hardly know how to hold it in my mind. At times, it feels easier to yearn for smaller things, a gentle touch, a genuine smile, the comfort of companionship that isn't tangled up in betrayal. Such concepts are nearly alien among my people. Love and pity are for the weak. We're taught, but I have tasted hints of them in my life, rare as water in a wasteland, and that has made all the difference. I will never forget the night I found the surface lily. It was during one of my hunting raids, far from the city. We had waylaid a group of human merchants traveling an old tunnel. Most were slain in the fight, but one woman among them lingered on the edge of death, her spirit not yet fled. After the skirmish, As the others prepared to march our surviving captives home, I drifted to where she lay on blood-stained moss. In her hand, clutched to her chest, was a small object, a dried flower, brittle with age, pressed between glass panes on a locket. Under the flicker of our fairy fire, I recognized it from descriptions in childhood lore lessons. A surface lily, white as new snow. It must have been a keepsake of hers, a piece of her home. I don't know why, but I pried it from her dead fingers and slipped it into my pocket. Perhaps some part of me was drawn to its fragile beauty, the symbol of a world without ceilings or perpetual night. Keeping it was foolish. Any personal loot was forbidden. All spoils belonged to the matron, but I hid the locket inside my boot. Back in my quarters, late at night when no eyes watched, I opened it and let the pale, flattened petals catch the faint, phosphorescent glow of the fungus lamps. That lily was like an emissary from another life, a life with sunlight. Something stirred in me that night, seeing tangible proof of a world beyond Lolth's web. I realized I hungered to see that world, no matter how dangerous the thought. In secret, I began wearing the locket on a leather string under my tunic. Against my skin, its presence, a quiet rebellion and comfort. I was not entirely alone in my forbidden yearning. There was one other in our house who shared my seditious spark, Talzin, a fellow male a few years my junior. We trained together under the same masters and had each other's backs in many skirmishes. In a society where trust is a deadly gamble, we forged something like a friendship in the shadows. It was a cautious bond, at first a whisper here, a nod there, small signals that we did not view each other as threats. Over decades, that trust cautiously grew. Late after drills, when we were sure no priestess ears could hear, we exchanged hesitant words about our discontent. It was Talzin who first dared to articulate what I hardly dared admit I felt. "This isn't right," he murmured one night as we polished our blades in the armory, far from prying ears. "Life doesn't have to be like this." I nearly dropped my sword for fear someone had heard. Panic surged in me. Such talk was sedition of the highest order. I shushed him angrily, looking over my shoulder. But in his eyes I saw no madness, only a forlorn hope. In a halting voice, he confided that he had once met a prisoner, a surface elf bard, who survived in our slave pens for some weeks. This bard, in exchange for a quicker death, had shared tales of the surface with Talzin, of vast forests under gentle starlight, of cities where women and men walked as equals, of gods who did not demand murder as proof of faith. "Can you imagine?" Talzin has said, eyes shining. I could, and the imagining was like a blade of light piercing my heart. From that night on, a dangerous camaraderie bloomed between us. In stolen moments, Talzin and I nurtured each other's quiet rebellion. It was nothing overt, we were not fools. But sometimes after a successful raid, we would linger at the cave mouth before re-entering the city, our eyes drinking in the distant pinpricks of stars visible through a crack in the cavern roof. We never spoke while doing this, we just looked. To any overseer, we might seem to just be catching our breath, but in our hearts we were sharing the same dream, to see the open sky unchained. On another occasion, after a grueling temple ceremony where we had been forced to watch a dozen slaves sacrificed, I remember shaking with quiet rage and sorrow. Talzin clasped my shoulder to steady me, a gesture so simple yet so forbidden that I almost pulled away. Drow do not comfort, they exploit. But he gave me that small comfort, and I accepted it, each of us pretending the moisture in our eyes was just sweat from the heat of the braziers. We even developed a secret sign between us. If one of us traced a small spiral web shape on her palm, it meant, "Beware, we are observed." If one of us instead drew a tiny 8-legged star, it meant, "The Spider Queen's eyes are elsewhere, it's safe to speak freely." Such little treasons of the heart kept me alive inside. Without them, I think I would have become a true creature of shadow, as hollow and cruel as the matrons wished. Talzin and I gave each other a sliver of humanity, though we would never call it that, lest Lolth strike us down for comparing ourselves to humans, those pitiful lesser beings. In secret, I even told Talzin about the lily locket I carried. One night, when a Roth slave call had left us both sickened, I showed it to him under lamplight filtered through my fingers. He gazed at the white petals and his breath caught. "It's beautiful," he whispered, voice full of ache. In that moment, I almost felt the weight of our subterranean prison lift. Just a little, but every shared wish and clandestine hope was a thread pulled taut on Lolth's web, and I knew, we both knew, that if we were not careful, the Spider Queen's spiderlings, her priestesses, would feel that vibration and come for us. So our longings remained carefully contained. We outwardly continued our roles as obedient male fodder, dutifully competing in the ranks, currying favor where we could, groveling appropriately. I became weapons master, as I mentioned, and Talzin earned a post as House Wizard's assistant, honing his minor gift for magic under the tutelage of our matron's brother, a dour male, whose own spirit had long been broken. We even feigned rivalry when others watched, pretending to dislike each other, to quash any suspicion that we might make common cause. It was a necessary performance in a city where to show friendship is to hand someone a knife for your own back. Compassion and love were easy weaknesses to exploit, so we hid our bond under layers of calculated indifference. But in quiet corners, our whispers continued. We spoke of the surface songs Talzin had heard of the concept of freedom, though neither of us truly understood what a life not ruled by fear would even feel like. For me, freedom took the shape of that lily's promise. For him, perhaps the echo of a bard's song carried on a clean breeze. In those clandestine talks, a plan began to form in fragments and half-spoken hints. It was madness, really, the thought of escape. We never dared utter the word plainly, but in our own code we speculated. If one were to slip away during a raid on the surface tunnels, if one had supplies and a route, could one possibly survive outside? The Underdark is a deadly maze even for us, and the surface is lethal to Drow. In its own way, the hated sunlight can burn our eyes blind. But perhaps under cover of night, perhaps following the shallow tunnels by the old rivers, we both knew the odds were grim. And even if we succeeded in fleeing the city, the priestesses would stop at nothing to hunt down traitors. The majority of Drow who try to escape are either found and sacrificed or perish alone in the wilds. We had heard the cautionary tales of the few who fled. Most ended in horrific deaths, and those rare survivors like the fabled Drist Duerden were figures of legend, practically deemed impossible anomalies. We are not Drist, I told myself grimly. We are not peerless warriors guided by some divine destiny. We are just two desperate souls. Still, the very act of imagining a life beyond this torture was intoxicating. It was hope, and hope is the most forbidden thing of all in Lolth's dominion. For a long time, that hope coexisted with fear in a precarious balance within me. I felt as if I walked on a taut strand of spider silk stretched over an endless abyss. One misstep, one moment of weakness, and I would fall into ruin, dragging Talzin with me. The more I yearned for freedom, the heavier the weight of obedience seemed to press on my shoulders. Every day that I played the dutiful male, I felt a bit of my spirit strain against its chains. A storm was quietly gathering in my heart, even as I kept my face impassive and subservient. Outwardly, I continued to endure the daily degradations. When my matron mother summoned me to her private chambers, often to vent her frustrations with pain, males make convenient punching bags after all, I kneeled and accepted her strikes without a sound. Inside, I was screaming not from the physical pain, though her snake whip left me quivering in agony and new welts joined the old on my back, but from the indignity of having to thank her for the punishment afterwards. Yes, we are expected to thank our superiors for correcting our faults. Thank you, matron, for your wisdom and mercy. I forced myself to whisper through bloody lips on one such occasion, tasting iron. Mercy. The word almost made me laugh hysterically. Her blows had been particularly vicious that night. She was enraged that a rival house had outmaneuvered her in a trade deal, and I, as usual, served as her living stress relief. As she finally dismissed me, I caught a glimpse of myself in her grand mirror. A lithe male drow with fresh crimson streaks crisscrossing his back, eyes downcast, hands shaking. I barely recognized that cowering figure as me. In that moment, a thought lashed across my mind like lightning. I will die here, in thrall to these merciless women, if I do nothing. It was not a resolve yet, only a despairing realization. And with it came an accompanying bolt of guilt. Even thinking such a thing felt like treason against my entire culture. Immediately, I dropped to my knees in that empty corridor outside her chamber and prayed fervently to Lolth for forgiveness, panicked at my own impudence. It was reflexive, drilled into me. But deep down, I wondered if Lolth could sense the hollowness of my prayer, the way my words rang false even to my own ears. That night I found Talzin and, in hushed words, told him, I am ready. Whatever it takes. I cannot live like this much longer. He put a hand on my shoulder, steadying as always, his face a mix of determination and dread. We knew the time was nearing to attempt the unthinkable, to escape. We began to clandestinely gather what we could. A cache of dried mushrooms and water in a pack. A stolen map from the house wizard's library showing tunnels that led upward. A small vial of piwafwai cloth dye to help us hide. Each item had to be pilfered carefully, spaced out over weeks so as not to draw notice. All the while, my outward behavior had to be flawless. If anything, I needed to be more compliant, more invisible than ever. Any hint of nervousness or unusual activity could provoke suspicion. The priestesses of Lolth are adept at sniffing out treachery. A Drow inquisitor or mistress of the academy can spot a lie in a heartbeat, and I was never a good liar. So I threw myself into my familiar mask of the dour, loyal male. I barked orders and insults at the younger males during training, aping the harshness of our society to avoid looking soft. I prostrated myself twice as fervently at ceremonies. I even volunteered for extra patrols and tasks to seem the eager servant. All of it a desperate gambit to hide the fact that inside my heart was racing at the thought of imminent freedom. As the fateful time drew near, fear also grew, coiling in my gut like a living thing. At random moments sharpening my sword, or eating my thin mushroom gruel in the mess hall, sudden terror would grip me at what we intended. I would recall the tales of those who failed Lolth's tests, the unlucky ones turned into driders as punishment. I had seen a drider once with my own eyes, a grotesque fusion of drow and giant spider, all chitin and twisted hatred. It lurked on the outskirts of the city, a cautionary horror for all to behold. The thought that I could become that mind shattered, cursed to skitter in the dark. Neither spider nor elf made me break into a cold sweat. Lolth's justice for male traitors is not swift death. Oh no. It is prolonged torment, transformation, or if she's feeling particularly cruel, public torture in the amphitheater. I imagine being dragged before a jeering crowd of my kin, bound to an iron web as priestesses flayed the skin from my limbs and broadcast my agony to the spectators via telepathic orbs. I imagine my matron mother's face twisted in scorn at her wayward son, my sisters laughing, and I would be utterly alone in that moment, condemned and forgotten. Is this risk worth it? I asked myself over and over in the dark of night. Maybe a quick death now would be kinder, but each time, the alternative, continuing this life indefinitely, seemed a fate just as cruel. What is a slow death of the soul worth compared to a chance, however slim, at genuine life? Talzin was my anchor in these turbulent thoughts. When I wavered, he would speak quietly of the plan, of the cool wind he imagined blowing through the trees on the surface, of the songs we might learn, or the allies we might find if we made it beyond Lolth's grasp. His eyes would get that distant glow, and I would see reflected in them my own deep longing. We bolstered each other's courage. Still, on the eve of our intended escape, I did something perhaps foolish. I snuck into the house chapel alone, in the dead of what passed for night, the hours of rest, when the city fell mostly quiet. I approached the great statue of Lolth, a rearing spider with the upper body of a beautiful drow woman, arms outstretched in menace. By all rights, I should not have been there unaccompanied. Males enter the chapel only on orders. But I needed to confront her, to see with my own eyes this cold goddess who ruled my life, and to finalize my resolve. The idol's eyes, black gems, seemed to follow me as I walked closer. Even alone, I felt the need to kneel. Such was the indoctrination in my bones. I knelt before Lolth, and I did pray, though not for forgiveness this time. I prayed for strength to do what I must. It was almost like saying farewell. My lips uttered the ritual words of devotion, but in my heart, I spoke different words. If I am wrong, strike me down now. The idol was silent, of course, and lifeless stone. Yet as I rose, I felt a strange calm. I had made my choice. I would rather die seeking freedom than live one more century on my knees. Unbeknownst to me, that final calm night was the last peace I'd have, for fate, or perhaps Lolth's subtle hand, was already weaving a different end to our story. The next day arrived with a suffocating sense of inevitability. Talzin and I had decided that during our upcoming scheduled raid to the caverns near the surface, we would break away and make our escape. The raid was to gather fresh slaves from a rumored group of surface dwellers encroaching on our domain. A perfect cover, we thought, outside the city. Fewer eyes, the chaos of battle providing opportunity. I remember fastening my Piwafwi cloak that morning, hands trembling slightly with a mix of excitement and dread. I tucked the lily locket under my tunic, as I always did, but this time I pressed it hard against my chest, as if to draw bravery from it. Talzin gave me the smallest of nods as we assembled with a raiding party at the gate. This was it. But fate is a cruel trickster. We never got the chance to enact our plan, because the breaking point came from an unexpected direction. As we were gearing up, house guards suddenly seized Talzin. It happened in a blur. One moment he was at my side, buckling his sword belt. The next 3 armored females had his arms pinned. He struggled, eyes wide in alarm, and managed to shout, "Run!" before a gag was thrust in his mouth. I stood there paralyzed, every instinct screaming at me to do something, but surrounded by loyal house soldiers and priestesses, I could only watch in horror. Our matron mother herself swept into the courtyard, her face a mask of wrath. "Traitor!" she spat at Talzin. My heart plummeted. They knew. They knew. The forbidden maps, the supplies, someone must have discovered them, or perhaps an informant caught our hushed conversations. However it happened, Talzin's slight glimmer of hope had been exposed, and by the matron's presence, it was clear this was to be made into a spectacle. I wanted to shout that it was my idea too, that he was not alone in this, but self-preservation and terror sealed my lips. 2 other male attendants roughly grabbed me by the shoulders. I thought I was to be arrested as well, but instead one hissed in my ear, "Do nothing foolish if you value your life." They held me there, forcing me to witness. A trial or the mockery of one unfolded on the spot. The matron accused Talzin of plotting to betray the house and forsake Lolth. He had no opportunity to defend himself. The gag ensured his silence. Not that any defense would matter. In our law, the word of a matron or high priestess is absolute truth in itself. Talzin's eyes met mine for one fleeting moment. In them, I saw apology and fear. The kind of fear that reaches primal depths, the realization of imminent doom. My stomach churned. I may have quietly voided my bladder at that instant, shameful as it is to admit. The matron decreed that such heresy would be punished in the amphitheater at once, to send a message. My mind screamed in disbelief and open punishment. Now? Usually these grisly affairs were nighttime entertainments, but she was clearly furious and perhaps a tad fearful. A potential defection under her roof was a grave slight upon her reputation in Lolth's eyes. So she wanted to set an example immediately. Talzin was dragged away, and I, to my confusion, was dragged along. They did not bind me, but they kept a firm grip on my arms as they escorted me behind the matron's retinue. A dread certainty flooded me. They were suspicious of me too, perhaps unsure of my involvement. I was a hair's breadth from doom myself, but for now I was ordered to come witness, likely to drive home a lesson and possibly to test me. We reached the public amphitheater, a vast cavern coliseum illuminated by eerily glowing fungi and magical flames. Word spread quickly, a heretic male to be punished. A crowd gathered in anticipation, dark elven faces alight with cruel glee. Public torture and executions are our city's favorite sport, after all. Talzin was secured at the center on a raised obsidian platform. They had stripped him to the waist and shackled his arms above his head, his feet barely touching the ground. I was forced to stand at the front of the throng, close enough to see every nuance of his face, every tremor of his muscle. A hush fell as the matron mother raised her arms. She invoked Lolth's name, pronouncing that darkness has found a traitor in our midst. I remember every word in chilling detail. She spoke of how Lolth's justice would be executed today. How to even think of forsaking the Spider Queen was the deepest blasphemy. My ears roared with my own pounding blood. I could scarcely breathe. Talzin caught my eye again. To my astonishment, he had somehow spat out the gag. Maybe he was allowed a last utterance by twisted tradition, or maybe his sheer defiance loosened it. In a raspy voice, he cried out not for mercy, but something else. "This is wrong. We need not live like this." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, half shock, half titillation at his audacity. I saw Priestess's eyes widen and then narrow in rage. Talzin's words cut off with a strangled cry as a snake whip bit into his back. The matron had flicked it herself, lips curled in disdain. She struck again and again. The 5 heads of the snake whip writhed and tore at Talzin's flesh, each strike drawing blood and a tremor of agony. But Talzin, he laughed. It was a broken, wet laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. "Lolth take you all," he gasped, crimson running down his back. "You are the weak ones, slaves to a tyrant of webs." His defiant declaration ended in a choking spasm, as one of the serpents coiled around his throat. I should have stayed silent. I should have remained the dutiful observer. But something inside me shattered at that moment the sight of my only friend, brave or foolish enough to speak truth, being choked and flayed alive before a leering audience. It ignited a fury in me unlike anything I had felt before. Decades of fear and subjugation crystallized into a single, irrepressible scream. "Stop!" I roared, stepping forward without thinking. "Mercy! Please!" The words escaped me in a cracked, desperate wail. I'm not even sure whom I was pleading to. The matron, Lolth herself, the crowd. My voice echoed briefly, and in the stunned silence that followed, I realized I had just condemned myself. All eyes turned to me, disbelief from the common folk in the stands, shock and outrage from the priestesses on the platform. My matron mother's gaze was pure murder. Mercy, that most Drow-like of requests. In a heartbeat, 2 guards seized me. I did not resist. I was numb, my outburst surprising even myself. Perhaps I had hoped my plea might spare Talzin a fraction of suffering. Futile, yes, but the scream came from a place of anguish, not logic. The matron descended the steps toward me, handing her writhing whip to an attendant. "Mercy?" she purred with venomous softness. "Our little weapons master shows his true weakness at last." She grabbed my chin with clawed fingers. I felt her nails biting into my cheeks as she forced me to lock eyes with her. I expected immediate death. Instead, her lips curved into a cold smile. "Very well," she said, voice amplified so the crowd could hear. "Mercy shall be granted." For one foolish heartbeat, I thought she might spare Talzin. but her eyes never left mine. "Since you care so deeply, you shall deliver this mercy." She nodded to the guards, and I was dragged forward, stumbling up onto the blood-slick platform. The matron's hand fell on my shoulder in a mockery of gentle guidance. "Grant your friend a swift end. That is what you wanted, yes?" she whispered into my ear. My stomach dropped. This was her idea of a cruel joke. She was giving me exactly what I'd begged for, the opportunity to end Talzin's suffering, and by doing so, force me to prove my loyalty in the most twisted way imaginable. They pressed a dagger hilt into my trembling hand. I recognized it. A sacrificial blade, curved and envenomed. My vision blurred with tears when had I started crying openly. I do not know, but my face was wet. Talzin was barely conscious, hanging by his shackles, blood running in rivulets down his body. He lifted his head with great effort and looked at me. In his eyes, incredibly, I saw empathy. "It's all right," he seemed to say with that look. Perhaps he even managed a tiny nod. Or maybe his muscles just gave a spasm I'll never truly know. My heart pounded like a war drum in my ears. This was the moment of choice, the fulcrum on which my fate teetered. If I refused, we'd both be tortured to death. If I complied, I would live, but at the cost of the only friendship I'd ever known, and likely my very soul. Talzin tried to speak through cracked lips, and a bubble of blood spilled out. I leaned in, tears dropping onto the platform. He whispered, so faint I barely caught it. "Do it." A command, a plea, an absolution, maybe all of those at once. My hand was like stone as I raised the dagger. "I'm sorry," I mouthed silently. Then I did as my matron bid. I gave him mercy. The blade found Talzin's heart in one clean thrust. His body tensed, a gasp escaping him, and then it relaxed. Shackles clanked as his weight sagged fully. He was gone, the light in his eyes snuffed. I had killed my dearest friend, snuffing out the one warm ember in my dark life. What followed happened in a haze. The crowd's cheer rose in a deafening roar, whether in approval of blood or in surprise at the dramatic turn. I know not. My matron mother raised my arm high, as if I were a champion who had just won a great duel. I wanted to scream, to vomit, to collapse. But I stood there numbly as she announced, "Loyalty to Lolth prevails. Thus is treachery purged from our house." The onlookers roared their adulation for her and for Lolth. No one cheered for me except, perhaps ironically. In their eyes, I was just the tool wielded to enact punishment, a male who had, at the critical moment, remembered his place. I scarcely recall being escorted back to the house. My hands were cleaned, armor removed by attendants, all in silence. I think I was in shock. My matron, satisfied that order was restored and appearances maintained, deigned to spare my life. In fact, she made a public show the next day of praising my loyalty for all to hear. "See how strong my mails are, how unwavering," she preened to her allies. Inside, I felt hollowed out. I had passed Lolth's final test, in a sense. I had sacrificed what I loved most on Lolth's altar, proving that nothing, not friendship, not compassion, would outweigh my fear and obedience. In doing so, I had also sacrificed the last piece of my heart. That was some years ago now. How many? I have lost count. Time flows strangely, when each day is just another bead on an unending rosary of regret. I continue my duties, as ever. I remain the house weapons master. In fact, my standing improved after that grim day. The matron's mail has proven his fealty, they whisper. Some even call me Talabuk in the streets, now a Drow word for a creature with no soul. I am left alone more often, which is perhaps as close to safety as a male can get. No one fears a broken man. In the eyes of my superiors, I am thoroughly tamed. At night, I still dream of the surface sometimes, but those dreams are muted, distant. More often I see Talzin's face, contorted in pain, then softening in relief as the dagger took his life. I awaken with tears already on my cheeks. I do not wipe them away immediately. There is no one to see in the privacy of my pallet. In those quiet moments before I don my mask for another day, I allow myself one small act of rebellion. I feel the grief, the guilt, the longing. I let it wash through me, reminding me that I am still capable of feeling something. It hurts, oh it hurts, but that pain is real and mine. It means Lolth has not completely won, not yet. Every morning, before the prayers, I also perform a secret ritual of my own. Hidden in a crevice behind a loose stone in my quarters is the locket with the surface lily. Amazingly, they never confiscated it. I suppose in the tumult it was forgotten, and I never volunteered its existence. I retrieve it with reverence and open its cracked shell. The lily's petals are so fragile now, I hardly dare touch them, but their whiteness, faded but still discernible, reminds me of a concept of purity, of an unsullied life that might exist somewhere. I hold it, and I think of all the things Talzin and I whispered about. I think of a night sky full of true stars, of a gentle wind, of what love might feel like in a world without fear. Then I close it and hide it away again. That minute or two of reflection is enough to stoke the tiniest ember in my chest. I need that ember, or else I would truly be the walking corpse everyone already believes me to be. By day, I play my role with perfection. No one suspects that within this obedient shell is a mind that still questions. I sometimes catch a priestess giving me a curious look, perhaps wondering if I harbor any resentment. But I long ago perfected the art of an empty expression. In truth, I do not think they care after all. I destroyed the only friend I had with my own hands to please them. What further proof of subservience could they require? In their eyes, I am safe, inconsequential. And so, I move through the motions of my existence, training the new batch of young males, poor things. I see the spark in some of them, and I ache, knowing I will watch it be crushed, leading raids, kneeling through sermons praising Lolth's boundless mercy. Yes, they use that word without a hint of irony. Lolth's mercy. I've learned that in the Drow tongue, it essentially means the quick death granted to a supplicant who has pleased her through suffering. A twisted concept, but one I'm intimately familiar with now. Sometimes, when I am ordered to attend the priestesses in the great public tortures or sacrifices, I find myself dissociating. I stare at the victims, but I am miles away, numb. It is as if I've built a cocoon of shadow around my heart, and in that darkness inside me, I whisper to Talzin, "We tried. We failed. I'm sorry." I don't know if some part of him hears wherever souls go, but it brings me a measure of peace to keep his memory alive when everything else of warmth has been stamped out. What if you were born male in Drow society? It is a question that haunts every moment of my life. This is the answer. You would live every day under a blade, both literal and metaphorical. You would choke down your own pride, joy, and hope until you could no longer remember their taste. You would smile at cruelty and call it normal. You would lie, bleed, and kill on command because the alternative is a fate far worse. You would find that even the smallest kindness is an act of rebellion. And if by miracle you found someone or something to care about, you would learn the true cost of survival here, because Lolth and her priestesses would make you choose, again and again, between that love and your own life, until eventually one or the other is destroyed. I often sit in the quiet hours and contemplate the web of shadows that ensnares us all. The females who rule are as much its spiders as they are its flies, caught in the cycle of violence and fear that Lolth designed. My matron mother, with all her power, lives in terror of displeasing Lolth or showing weakness to her rivals. My sisters plot incessantly, knowing one misstep could lead to their being offered up to the Spider Queen or assassinated by an ambitious daughter. It is an endless, merciless game. And we males, we are the pawns, the expendable pieces to be sacrificed early and often. Perhaps, in an obscene way, we are luckier than the high priestesses. Our lives are simpler, if more wretched. We have only to obey and die when called. They must constantly scheme to stay alive and in favor. It is a poisoned hierarchy at every level. Still, I would not wish this existence on anyone, not even on my worst enemy from the surface. Better to be born under a bright sun, in a world that feels the wind and rain, even if it's a harsh world, than in the eternal suffocating night of Lolth's dominion. Better to live one day free than 1,000 years as a caged beast. I believe that now, more than ever. Belief, another dangerous word for a drow male. Yet I keep these beliefs secret, tucked away like my lily locket. I survive, emptied, scarred, but alive. And in the silent temple of my mind, I preserve one final heresy: hope. It's a frail, misguided hope, perhaps. I am realistic. I know I will likely die down here, perhaps violently, and my name will be forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, the memory of what I dreamed will remain in the weave of fate. Maybe another like me will find an old locket of a lily or hear a heretic bard's song, and they will try again. And one night, Lolth's web will strain under too many of us pulling its threads. Until then, I remain what I've always been, a survivor, a male drow, born to darkness. I survive at the cost of everything that mattered, and that is the story of my kind. In the end, the Spider Queen won. She taught me that, to live under her rule, I had to become the very thing I despised. My soul is all but forfeit. Yet as I finish recalling these events, I find there is still a faint pulse in that soul. It beats with pain, yes, but also with a faint rhythm of defiance. The cavern city around me is quiet now. All the screams and hisses have faded into the distant trickle of an underground stream. In this hushed moment, I dare to imagine the sound of leaves rustling in a breeze, the laughter of children in daylight, the gentle call of a night bird under a true moon. imagining that is the smallest and greatest freedom left to me. I cling to it in the darkness, even as a spider might cling to the edge of its tattered web. And I whisper a lullaby to myself in a language that has no word for hope, making one up as I go. These are the dreams of a male drow, born in Lolth's world, bitter as gall, yet somehow still reaching for a light he has never known. And so I endure, a witness and a casualty of the Spider Queen's design. This is life in the shadows. This is the price of survival. If you were born male in Drow society, my story would be yours.